Hello, and welcome to History at Bedtime. I am glad you are here tonight. Whatever the day brought you, wherever it took you, you have arrived somewhere quiet now. This is your time. The world outside can wait. The things that were left undone, the thoughts that have been circling all evening, let them rest for a little while. You do not need them right now. Tonight, we are going to Rome. Not the Rome of tourists and traffic, not the city of gleaming restorations and guided tours, but the real Rome, the one that grew from a cluster of huts on a muddy hill by a river, and slowly, across many centuries, became something the world had never seen before and has never quite seen again. A city that began small and became enormous. A civilization that started with shepherds and ended with emperors who called themselves lords of the world. A story that unfolded over more than 1,000 years, touching every corner of the known world and leaving marks that are still visible today. In the roads beneath our feet, in the languages we speak, in the laws that govern us, in the architecture of our public buildings, and in the quiet way that certain ideas about how people should be governed have shaped human thinking ever since. Rome is not a simple story. It is not a story of pure triumph or pure decline. It is a human story, messy, surprising, full of contradiction, and in all of that, deeply recognizable. The Romans were not gods. They were people. They worried about money and their children's futures. They argued with their neighbors. They prayed to gods they hoped were listening. They built things they hoped would last. And many of those things did last, for 2,000 years and counting. So tonight, let us travel back together. Let your breathing slow. Let your body find its rest. And let the long, remarkable story of Rome carry you gently through the night. If these slow journeys through history help you unwind, you are welcome to like and subscribe to History at Bedtime. It helps others find their way here too, one quiet evening at a time. Now, let us begin at the very beginning. Before we walk through the gates of the Republic, it is worth staying for a little while with the landscape that made Rome possible. Italy was not a single nation in the early centuries. It was a long peninsula of mountains, valleys, coastal plains, and river crossings, filled with many peoples who spoke different languages and honored different gods. The Apennine Mountains ran down its spine. Small communities clung to hills, guarded passes, farmed narrow fields, and watched one another with the careful suspicion of neighbors who might become allies one year and enemies the next. Rome's first advantage was not that it was grand. It was that it stood in a useful place, close enough to the sea for trade, far enough inland to be safer from pirates, beside a river crossing that merchants, herders, and armies all had reason to use. The Tiber itself was not a wide imperial avenue in those first centuries. It was a working river, brown, changeable, sometimes generous and sometimes dangerous. Its waters could flood the low ground between the hills, turning future public spaces into marsh. But the same river carried salt, grain, pottery, timber, and news. Salt mattered more than it may seem to us now. In the ancient world, salt preserved food and sustained animals. Routes that carried salt from the coast into the interior were valuable, and Rome sat near one of them. A city does not need to begin with destiny. Sometimes it begins with a crossing, a hill, a market, a patch of defensible ground, and enough people who decide, slowly, that this place is worth keeping. The communities around early Rome were not empty background. The Etruscans to the north shaped Roman life in ways the Romans later remembered and sometimes tried to soften. They had cities, tomb paintings, craftsmen, wealth, and religious specialists who read divine signs in the flight of birds, the shape of lightning, and the organs of sacrificed animals. From the Etruscans, Rome absorbed techniques of drainage, temple building, public ceremony, and perhaps the very spectacle of authority. The purple-bordered toga, the curule chair, the fasces carried before magistrates as symbols of power. The Romans became masters at taking what worked from others and making it Roman. This habit began early. The Greek cities of southern Italy and Sicily also mattered. To later Romans, Greece was a teacher, a rival, and a mirror. Greek traders brought pottery, myths, artistic styles, and the alphabet that had already passed through Etruscan hands before Latin was written down. The Romans would one day conquer the Greek world politically, but Greek culture would conquer Roman education, literature, and philosophy in return. Even in the early centuries, the peninsula was a place of exchange. Ideas traveled with merchants and marriages, with captured artisans, with envoys, priests, and soldiers who saw something abroad and carried it home in memory. So when Rome began to rise, it did not rise from isolation. It rose from contact. It learned from hill peoples, river traders, Etruscan kings, Latin neighbors, Greek colonists, and enemies who forced it to adapt. This ability to learn from pressure is one of the quiet keys to Roman greatness. Rome lost battles. Rome made mistakes. Rome was humiliated more than once. But again and again, it studied the wound and changed the body around it. A failure became a reform. A defeat became a lesson. A borrowed practice became a Roman institution. The Roman story, from its beginning, is therefore not only a story of conquest. It is a story of absorption. Rome absorbed myths, gods, military techniques, roads, laws, alphabets, building methods, and people. It took them in, gave them Latin names, connected them to Roman memory, and used them to build something larger. The city that would later rule the Mediterranean began by listening, watching, copying, competing, and surviving in a crowded Italian world. The Romans themselves preferred to tell their beginning as a moral story. Romulus and Remus were not simply abandoned children. They were signs of a harsh world in which survival required force and favor. The she-wolf was not only a picturesque animal. She was a symbol of wild protection, a creature of the border between danger and nurture. The death of Remus was not only a family tragedy. It was an explanation of Rome's seriousness about boundaries, authority, and the terrible price of founding. To us, the myth may feel strange. To the Romans, it felt truthful in a deeper sense than ordinary record-keeping. It told them that Rome had always belonged to Mars, conflict, discipline, and the hard creation of order from violence. Even the Seven Hills had a sacred quality in Roman memory. The Palatine became associated with origins and later with imperial palaces. The Capitoline became the religious height, the place of Jupiter's temple and the symbolic summit of the state. The Aventine carried memories of plebeian identity and protest. The Forum, once marshy ground between hills, became the speaking heart of the city. Geography became memory. Memory became ritual. Ritual became politics. Rome was built not only with stone, but with repeated acts of remembering. Rome was born on 7 hills beside a river, and that geography shaped everything. The Tiber River cuts through the landscape of central Italy, and at a particular bend in its course, a series of low hills rise from the surrounding plain. These hills, the Palatine, the Aventine, the Capitoline, the Quirinal, the Viminal, the Esquiline, and the Celian, became the bones of Rome. They offered something precious in the ancient world, high ground from which to see approaching threats, and a river that provided both water and a route for trade. Between the hills lay low, marshy ground that would eventually be drained and built upon. But in the beginning, perhaps around the 9th or 8th century before the Common Era, small communities of farmers and shepherds settled on these hills separately, living in simple huts of timber and thatch, tending their animals, watching the river. The traditional date given by the Romans themselves for the founding of their city was 753 BCE, and they attributed it to a man named Romulus. According to the story they told, and they told it with great seriousness, Romulus and his twin brother Remus were the sons of the god Mars, an immortal woman named Rhea Silvia. Abandoned as infants and left by the riverbank, they were suckled by a she-wolf until a shepherd found them and raised them. Later, the brothers quarreled over where to build their city, and Romulus killed Remus. He then founded Rome on the Palatine Hill and became its first king. This story was not history in the way we use the word. It was something more important to the Romans. It was identity. It told them who they were, where they came from, and why their city had been destined for greatness from the very moment of its creation. The she-wolf nursing the twins became one of the most enduring symbols in Roman art, still recognizable today in the bronze sculpture displayed in Rome's Capitoline museums. What the archaeology actually shows is somewhat different from the legend, and in its own way, just as interesting. Excavations on the Palatine Hill have revealed traces of Iron Age settlement dating to the 9th century BCE. Post holes from simple round huts, storage pits, fragments of pottery. These were not the grand beginnings of an empire. They were the ordinary traces of ordinary people building ordinary lives on a hill above a river. Rome did not begin as a city. It began as a village, or rather as a collection of villages that gradually grew toward each other, merged, and began to share a common identity. The process was slow and probably invisible to those living through it. One generation simply built upon what the previous generation had left, and over time, something that had been a scattering of hilltop settlements became a single community with shared customs, shared festivals, and a shared sense of belonging to one place. The earliest Romans were ruled by kings, and this period, known as the regal period, lasted according to Roman tradition for roughly 2.5 centuries. 7 kings ruled in succession, and the Romans remembered them by name and by character. Romulus the founder, Numa Pompilius the wise lawgiver, Tullus Hostilius the warlike, Ancus Marcius the builder, and then 3 kings of Etruscan origin, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and finally Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, whose name alone suggests the fate that awaited him. The kings of early Rome were not absolute monarchs in the manner of Eastern rulers. They were leaders who consulted a council of elders, the Senate, and whose power was constrained by custom and expectation. But the institution of kingship was something the Romans would come to distrust deeply, and the story of how it ended shaped their political imagination for centuries. In 509 BCE, according to Roman tradition, the last king was expelled. Tarquinius Superbus had ruled with what the Romans called arrogance and tyranny, ignoring the Senate, acting without consultation, treating the people of Rome as subjects rather than citizens. The final cause of his downfall, as the Romans told it, was an act of violence committed by his son against a noblewoman named Lucretia, who took her own life in shame. The Roman nobility rose, expelled the king, and made a solemn decision. Rome would never again be ruled by a king. In place of the monarchy, they established a republic, a system of government in which power was shared, offices were held for limited terms, and the principle that no single man should hold unchecked authority was embedded in the very structure of the state. The republic would last nearly 5 centuries, and the values it represented, civic duty, service, restraint, the subordination of individual ambition to the common good, became the foundation of Roman identity. The early republic was not a democracy in the modern sense. Power belonged first to aristocratic families, the patricians, who claimed ancient ancestry and controlled the most prestigious priesthoods and offices. Below them stood the plebeians, a broad and varied group that included farmers, craftsmen, traders, and many citizens who served in Rome's armies but did not share equally in its power. The tension between these groups shaped the first centuries of Republican history. Rome's political system did not emerge complete and balanced in a single moment. It was argued into shape. The struggle between patricians and plebeians is one of the most important and least cinematic parts of Rome's rise. It was not a single battle. It was a long series of pressures, withdrawals, compromises, and reforms. The plebeians discovered that they had power because Rome needed them. They were soldiers. They were workers. They were fathers of families whose service held the city together. According to tradition, when their demands were ignored, they withdrew from the city in a kind of collective strike, refusing to serve until their grievances were addressed. From this pressure came the office of the tribune of the plebs, a magistrate whose sacred duty was to protect ordinary citizens from abuses by other officials. The tribunes became one of the Republic's most remarkable inventions. They could intervene on behalf of citizens. They could veto certain actions. Their persons were considered inviolable, meaning that harming them was a religious offense as well as a political one. In theory, they gave the plebeians a voice inside a system still dominated by aristocratic prestige. In practice, the office could be used nobly or dangerously, as all power can. But the idea behind it was striking, that the state needed a built-in defender for those who might otherwise be crushed by rank and wealth. Another milestone was the writing of the 12 Tables. In the mid-5th century BCE, Roman law was set down publicly on bronze tablets and displayed so citizens could know the rules by which they were judged. The laws were harsh in places, reflecting a world very different from ours. But the act of writing them mattered enormously. Law that is hidden in the memory of elites can be bent quietly. Law displayed in public becomes something citizens can point to, argue from, and demand. This Roman respect for public law would become one of the deepest roots of their political identity. The Republic also depended on a moral vocabulary that Romans repeated with great seriousness. Virtus meant courage, excellence, and the proper strength of a Roman man. Pietas meant duty toward gods, family, and country. Gravitas meant seriousness, weight, self-control. Fides meant trustworthiness, the keeping of faith. Dignitas was the public standing a man acquired through office, service, ancestry, and conduct. These words were not decorative. They were the language Romans used to judge themselves and one another. A man could be rich, clever, and victorious, but if he lacked self-command, if he seemed too hungry for kingship or luxury, he could be seen as dangerous. Of course, Roman virtue often existed beside Roman ambition. The Republic praised restraint while rewarding glory. It warned against personal domination while celebrating generals who returned with treasure and captives. It honored simple farmers while pouring the wealth of conquest into aristocratic houses. This tension would never disappear. It gave Roman politics energy, but it also planted the seeds of crisis. A society that demands public virtue while offering immense rewards for private ambition must constantly struggle to keep its balance. In these early centuries, the ideal Roman citizen was often imagined as a farmer-soldier, a man who owned land, worked it with his family, took up arms when called, fought for the Republic, and returned home without imagining that war made him greater than the law. Whether this ideal ever described most Romans perfectly is less important than the power it held in Roman memory. Later writers look back to figures like Cincinnatus, who supposedly left his plow to serve as dictator in an emergency, defeated the enemy, then gave up power and returned to his farm. The story may be polished by legend, but its lesson is clear. The best citizen is the one who can hold power and let it go. That ideal would become harder to preserve as Rome expanded. Wars grew longer. Campaigns took soldiers farther from their farms. Wealth from abroad widened the gap between rich and poor. Commanders spent years with their armies and began to receive loyalty that once belonged mainly to the state. But in the early Republic, the balance still seemed possible. Rome was poor compared with the empires it would one day conquer, but it was disciplined, stubborn, and deeply invested in the idea that public life required sacrifice. The Roman Republic was governed through a system of remarkable complexity and ingenuity. At its head were two consuls, elected annually, who held supreme civil and military authority. The annual election meant that power was always temporary. A man who was consul this year was a private citizen next year, answerable to the same laws as everyone else. The two consuls could also each veto the other's decisions, a built-in check against abuse of power. Below the consuls were a range of other magistrates, praetors who administered justice, censors who maintained the citizen rolls and oversaw public morality, quaestors who managed finances, aediles who supervised markets and public buildings. Above all of them, providing continuity and accumulated wisdom, sat the Senate, the council of senior statesmen whose authority was moral rather than legal, but whose influence was enormous. The Romans were justly proud of this system. It was not perfect, and it would eventually fail under the pressure of its own contradictions. But for several centuries, it produced governance of remarkable stability and effectiveness. Rome in its early republican centuries was not yet a great power. It was one of many city-states in central Italy, competing with its neighbors for land, resources, and influence. The Etruscans to the north had built a sophisticated urban civilization and had influenced Rome deeply. The Romans borrowed from them their alphabet, their religious practices, their engineering techniques, and their taste for certain forms of luxury. The Latins to the south were close relatives, sharing language and custom. The Samnites in the central Apennines were fierce warriors who challenged Roman expansion for decades. The Greek colonies in southern Italy brought wealth, sophistication, and cultural prestige. Early Rome existed within a crowded, competitive landscape, and its rise to dominance was not inevitable. It was the result of centuries of patient expansion, military success, diplomatic skill, and an extraordinary capacity to absorb and integrate the peoples it conquered. Rome's expansion through Italy was slow, difficult, and often uncertain. The map can make it look inevitable, as though Roman power simply spread outward like ink on parchment. But for the people living through it, every generation brought real danger. Latin towns resisted Roman leadership. Mountain peoples descended into lowland territory. Etruscan cities fought to preserve their influence. The Samnites, who lived in the rugged Apennines, forced Rome into long and bitter wars that tested its military system more severely than any enemy before Carthage. The Samnite Wars mattered because they taught Rome to fight in difficult country. The old style of heavy infantry battle, shaped by Greek models and suited to flatter ground, did not always work in hills, ravines, and narrow valleys. Roman forces had to become more flexible. The Manipular Legion, divided into smaller tactical units, allowed greater movement and adaptability than a solid phalanx. Once again, Rome learned from pressure. A landscape that punished rigidity helped produce an army that could bend without breaking. The Romans also learned that defeated enemies could become future strength. After wars in Italy, they built colonies in strategic locations, extended roads, distributed land, and bound communities into alliances. Some allies received full citizenship. Others received partial rights. Some kept local autonomy while supplying troops. The arrangement was not equal, but it was effective. Rome created a network of obligations and benefits that made rebellion costly and loyalty useful. By the time Rome faced great external threats, it could draw on manpower far beyond the city itself. One of the most important Roman tools of control was the colony. A Roman or Latin colony was not only a settlement, it was a statement. Veterans and citizens planted in a strategic place became living anchors of Roman power. They farmed, traded, raised families, watched roads, and reminded neighboring peoples that Rome intended to remain. Colonies spread language, law, habits of urban planning, and Roman forms of public life. They were quieter than battles, but often more permanent. Roads helped hold this growing Italian network together. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus, was one of the earliest and most famous. It ran south from Rome toward Capua and later Brundisium, tying the city to southern Italy and, eventually, to routes across the Adriatic. A road was military infrastructure, economic artery, and symbol all at once. Soldiers marched faster. Merchants moved goods more reliably. Officials carried orders. News traveled. Stones laid into the earth became lines of obedience and exchange. The conquest of Italy also changed Rome's imagination of itself. The city was no longer merely one Latin community among many. It became the head of a confederation, then the master of the peninsula. But Italy was not simply crushed beneath Roman rule. Its peoples became part of the Roman story, sometimes willingly, sometimes after fierce resistance. Their soldiers served in Roman armies. Their elites sought Roman honors. Their gods found places in Roman religious life. Over time, the distinction between Rome and Italy became one of the great questions of Roman politics, especially for those allies who fought Rome's wars but did not yet share fully in Rome's citizenship. This question would eventually explode in the social war of the early 1st century BCE, when Rome's Italian allies demanded the citizenship they believed their service had earned. The war was brutal, but Rome ultimately granted citizenship widely across Italy. It was a turning point. The Roman people were no longer only the inhabitants of one city and its old citizen body. They became, in law, a much broader community. Rome had resisted sharing itself, then survived by doing exactly that. This pattern would later repeat on an imperial scale. One of the most distinctive features of Roman expansion was what happened after conquest. Many ancient empires extracted tribute and resources from conquered peoples while keeping them firmly subordinate. Rome did something different. It extended citizenship, gradually, partially, and often grudgingly, but genuinely. Allies who supported Rome in its wars could eventually become Romans. Communities that submitted could retain their local customs and leadership structures while accepting Roman authority. This policy of integration was not without its tensions and contradictions. There were revolts. There were periods of harsh treatment. There were communities that resisted and paid a terrible price. But over time, the ability to absorb rather than simply dominate gave Rome a resilience that its rivals could not match. When you conquered a Roman ally, you were fighting not just Rome, but all the peoples who had become part of what Rome meant. The Roman army was the instrument through which Rome built its empire, and it is worth pausing to understand what made it so formidable, not in the dramatic sense of battlefield glory, but in the quieter sense of organization, discipline, and adaptation. The Roman legionary was not simply a fighter. He was a builder, an engineer, a road layer, a camp constructor. Every night when a Roman army stopped to camp, it did not simply pitch tents. It dug ditches, raised earthworks, laid out streets, and built a fortified enclosure according to a standard plan that every soldier knew by heart. This discipline, this transformation of soldiers into organized workers as much as fighters, gave the Roman military a practical effectiveness that went far beyond the battlefield. The army did not just win wars. It built the infrastructure through which Roman civilization then spread. Discipline in the Roman army was famous, but discipline was not only punishment. It was routine. A soldier learned how to march, dig, carry, cook, maintain equipment, obey signals, and fit his own movement into the movement of the larger body. A legion could become almost architectural in its order. When it marched, it carried tools as well as weapons. When it camped, it reproduced a temporary Roman town: gates, streets, command spaces, supply areas, and defensive works. The camp taught soldiers to live inside Roman order even when far from Rome. The equipment of the Roman soldier changed across the centuries. In the Middle Republic, the legion was organized into lines of younger and older soldiers, with different roles and degrees of experience. Later, under the reforms associated with Marius, the army became more professional, and soldiers increasingly served for long periods under commanders who promised pay, spoils, and land at the end of service. The familiar image of the imperial legionary, helmet, shield, short sword, javelin, armor, sandals, and pack, belongs especially to this later world. But across all periods, the Roman army's strength lay less in any single weapon than in its capacity to organize men under stress. Roman soldiers also built the empire physically. They cut roads through forests, raised bridges over rivers, dug canals, constructed forts, quarried stone, and laid out towns. On frontiers, military bases often became seeds of urban life. Traders followed, families formed, veterans settled, local people entered Roman service. A fort could become a market could become a town, and a town could become a city that still exists centuries later under a different name. The military map of Rome quietly became part of the urban map of Europe. Yet army life was not romantic. It meant distance from home, strict discipline, hard labor, danger, and long waits in places that may have felt cold, wet, hot, lonely, or strange. Letters from soldiers and their families, especially from places like Vindolanda near Hadrian's Wall, show a world of socks requested from home, birthday invitations, supply problems, promotions, complaints, and affection. These small documents soften the metal image of Rome. A legion was not only shields and eagles. It was men needing boots, writing to friends, missing familiar food, and marking time at the edge of the known world. The Roman military oath, the sacramentum, bound soldiers personally and religiously to service. To break discipline was not merely to disobey a superior. It was to violate a sacred promise. This is another reminder that Roman institutions often joined practical and religious meaning. A camp was laid out carefully. Standards were honored. Omens were observed. Before battle, commanders might sacrifice and read signs. A modern mind may separate military logistics from sacred order, but Romans often did not. To them, victory required courage, preparation, command, and divine favor moving together. The army could make emperors, and eventually it often did. This was the danger hidden inside Roman military success. A state that relies on armies must control the loyalty of those armies. During the Republic, that loyalty gradually shifted from the civic ideal to individual commanders who could reward their men. During the Empire, legions on distant frontiers could proclaim a general emperor, and Rome would be forced to accept or fight. The army was Rome's shield, its road builder, its carrier of citizenship, and sometimes its kingmaker. Like many Roman achievements, it was both strength and danger. Roman roads are among the most enduring legacies of the civilization, and they deserve a moment of genuine attention. When we say that all roads lead to Rome, we are speaking literally about a network of highways that stretched across the empire, from the deserts of Syria to the misty hills of Scotland, from the banks of the Rhine to the edge of the Sahara. These were not simple tracks. They were engineered structures, built in layers, a deep foundation of large stones, a middle layer of smaller stones and rubble, a surface of carefully fitted paving stones set into concrete, with drainage ditches on either side to carry water away. The surface was cambered, slightly higher in the middle, so that rainwater ran off rather than pooling. Milestones marked the distance to Rome. Rest houses and inns were spaced at regular intervals. A Roman road was an act of civilizational while made permanent in stone, a declaration that distance would not be permitted to be an obstacle. The city of Rome itself, at the height of the empire, was something that required adjustment of the imagination to comprehend. By the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, It was home to perhaps 1 million people, possibly more, making it by far the largest city in the Western world and one of the largest anywhere on Earth at that time. Modern Rome, with its layers of medieval and Renaissance construction built over ancient foundations, gives only partial glimpses of what the ancient city looked like. But from those glimpses, from the writings of Roman authors, and from the work of archaeologists, we can reconstruct something of it. The city was dense, noisy, alive with commerce and movement. Its streets were narrow, many too narrow for wheeled vehicles, which were banned from entering the city during daylight hours in Julius Caesar's time to ease the congestion. The sounds of carts rumbling over stone pavements began at dusk and continued through the night. To enter Rome in the imperial period was to enter a city of layers. There were old temples beside new monuments, narrow alleys beside grand porticos, aristocratic houses beside crowded apartment blocks, sacred groves, markets, triumphal arches, fountains, workshops, shrines at crossroads, and the constant movement of people from every part of the empire. A person might hear Latin in one street, Greek in another, Aramaic or Egyptian or Punic in a harbor district, and local Italian dialects in the mouths of migrants who had come seeking work. Rome was the capital of an empire, but it was also a city of strangers learning to live side by side. The morning began early. Shopkeepers opened wooden shutters. Bakers pulled bread from ovens. Barbers set out stools. Teachers gathered pupils. Clients hurried to greet patrons in the daily ritual known as the salutatio, hoping for favors, invitations, legal help, or a small distribution of money or food. Wealthy men received these morning callers as part of the social performance of status. A Roman aristocrat's power was measured not only in land and office, but in the number of people who depended on him and appeared at his door. This patron-client system ran through Roman society. It could be generous, humiliating, practical, and deeply unequal all at once. A patron offered protection, legal assistance, gifts, loans, or connections. A client offered loyalty, public support, presence, and sometimes votes. The relationship gave Roman society a personal texture beneath its official institutions. Behind laws and offices stood networks of obligation, favors remembered, insults stored, debts repaid, and alliances made visible in the streets each morning. Education shaped the elite Roman mind. Boys, and sometimes girls in wealthy families, learned letters first with a literator, then grammar and literature with a grammaticus, and finally rhetoric with a teacher who trained them to speak persuasively in public. Rhetoric was not a decorative skill. It was power. In a society where law courts, assemblies, and political careers depended on speech, a man who could argue clearly, move an audience, and control language possessed a kind of weapon. Cicero's career shows this perfectly. He was not from the oldest nobility, but through talent, training, and relentless ambition, he became Rome's most famous orator. Women in Rome occupied a complex position. Legally and politically, they did not hold the public offices that defined male status. Yet Roman women could exercise influence through family, property, marriage alliances, household management, religious roles, and private networks of patronage. A matron's dignity mattered. Elite women could shape political careers, arrange marriages, manage estates, and preserve family memory. Inscriptions, letters, and tombs reveal women praised for modesty and loyalty, but also for intelligence, generosity, business skill, and public benefaction in cities across the empire. The Roman household was not only a private refuge. It was an economic, religious, and social unit. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, held legal authority, but actual family life was shaped by negotiation, affection, age, money, and circumstance. Household gods were honored at small shrines. Meals marked status and intimacy. Slaves, freedmen, Children, clients, and relatives might all move through the same domestic world, though with very different degrees of freedom and security. A Roman house could be beautiful, but it was also a machine of social order. Slavery was central to Roman life, and no honest account of Rome can pass over it too quickly. Enslaved people worked in fields, mines, homes, workshops, offices, schools, and imperial estates. Some endured brutal labor and short lives, especially in mines and large agricultural estates. Others, particularly in urban households, might be educated, trusted with accounts, or eventually freed. But the variety of conditions should not soften the basic fact. Roman society depended heavily on people who were legally owned by others. The grandeur of Rome rested partly on unfree labor. That contradiction is part of its story. Freedmen and freedwomen occupied an important middle place. A person who had been enslaved could be manumitted and become free, though with continuing obligations to former owners. Freedmen could become wealthy, especially in trade and administration, but they often carried social stigma. Their children, however, could rise further. The Roman world was hierarchical, but not completely frozen. Status could shift across generations. This capacity for movement, even limited and unequal, gave Roman society a dynamism that helped it absorb people from many backgrounds. Public entertainment filled the calendar. There were theatrical performances, chariot races, gladiatorial shows, animal hunts, religious festivals, processions, triumphs, and public banquets. Chariot racing, especially in the Circus Maximus, may have stirred more passion than gladiatorial combat. Teams identified by colors, reds, whites, blues, greens, drew fierce loyalty. A race could bring tens of thousands together in roaring excitement, as horses thundered around the turning posts and drivers risked death in the dust. The city did not live only through law and conquest. It lived through noise, appetite, spectacle, and shared emotion. In the evening, Rome changed. Daytime crowds thinned in some places and deepened in others. Lamps flickered, taverns filled, carts, banned during many daylight hours, rumbled through the streets. Wealthy households reclined at dinner, sometimes with poetry, music, and conversation. Poorer families ate simpler meals in rooms that might be cramped, smoky, and dim. Somewhere, a child learned a line of Virgil. Somewhere, a scribe copied a contract. Somewhere, an old soldier told a story that grew slightly larger with each telling. And above it all, on the hills, temples and palaces held the last light of the day. Most Romans in the city did not live in the grand houses that appear in popular imagination. They lived in apartment buildings called insulae, from the Latin word for island, because each building occupied its own city block. These were multi-story structures, sometimes reaching 5 or 6 stories high, built of brick and concrete. The ground floor typically contained shops and slightly better apartments. The upper floors were cheaper, smaller, darker, and more dangerous, both because fire was an ever-present risk in a city lit by oil lamps and heated by charcoal braziers, and because the upper floors of the tallest insulae were sometimes poorly constructed and prone to collapse. Archaeological evidence from Ostia, Rome's port city, where insulae have been preserved in remarkable condition, gives us a vivid sense of what this urban residential life looked like. Narrow staircases, small rooms, windows without glass, the sounds of neighbors through thin walls, the smells of cooking from the shop below. The wealthy Roman experience of city life was entirely different. Grand houses, domus, organized around central courtyards open to the sky, with rooms arranged around a central atrium where rainwater was collected in a shallow pool called an impluvium. Further back lay a garden courtyard, the peristyle, sometimes elaborately planted, with fountains and sculpture. The walls of wealthy Roman homes were painted vivid red and yellow and green, with architectural trompe-l'oeil designs or mythological scenes. The floors were often mosaic, tiny tesserae of colored stone set into intricate geometric or pictorial patterns. Some of these mosaics depict scenes of everyday life, mythological stories, nature, and even portraits, and they survive today in museums around the world with their colors still extraordinary after 2,000 years. Food in Rome was another world of complexity and variety. The staple of the Roman diet was grain, primarily wheat, which was consumed as bread and as porridge. The Roman state took the provisioning of its urban population with bread with tremendous seriousness. A complex system of grain procurement, storage, and distribution, drawing on grain shipped from Egypt, North Africa, and Sicily, kept the city fed. The famous phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses, captures something real about Roman urban politics. The expectation that the government would provide both basic nourishment and public entertainment. But Roman food went far beyond bread. Markets in Rome and in every Roman town sold an extraordinary range of produce: fresh vegetables, fish, olives, olive oil, wine, garum, a fermented fish sauce that was the Romans' universal condiment, added to almost every dish the way salt is added today. Cured meats, cheese, honey, exotic spices brought from the eastern reaches of the empire and beyond. The Roman appetite for variety was real, and the trade networks that supplied it spanned the known world. The Roman bathhouse, the thermae, is one of the most distinctively Roman contributions to the idea of public life, and it deserves careful attention. The baths were not simply places to get clean. They were social institutions, the gathering places of Roman civic life, open to all citizens at low cost or no cost. A visit to the baths might last several hours. The typical bathhouse offered a sequence of rooms of increasing heat: the frigidarium with its cold plunge pool, the tepidarium with its warm intermediate room, and the caldarium with its hot bath and steam. Beneath the floors of these heated rooms ran channels through which hot air flowed from furnaces, an underfloor heating system called the hypocaust that the Romans applied not only to bathhouses but to wealthy homes. The great imperial baths of Rome, the baths of Caracalla, the baths of Diocletian, were not merely functional buildings. They were architectural achievements of staggering ambition, with soaring vaulted ceilings, marble walls, elaborate mosaic floors, and gardens surrounding them. The Romans developed concrete, or rather, they refined and mastered a material that earlier cultures had used experimentally, and what they did with it changed architecture permanently. Roman concrete, known as opus cementitium, was made by mixing volcanic ash from the region around Pozzuoli with lime, seawater, and rubble. The result was a material of extraordinary properties. It was cheap, it could be poured into any shape, it was resistant to seawater, and over time, in the right conditions, it actually grew stronger rather than weaker. The Pantheon in Rome, a temple converted to a church and therefore surviving largely intact, is the most dramatic demonstration of Roman concrete's possibilities. Its dome, approximately 43 meters in diameter, was for nearly 14 centuries the largest concrete dome in the world. Standing inside the Pantheon today and looking up at that perfect hemisphere of concrete, with its open oculus at the crown letting in a circle of sky, one is standing inside one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements in human history. The Forum Romanum, the Roman Forum, was the civic heart of the city and, in a sense, the center of the Roman world. In the valley between the Palatine and the Capitoline Hills, the Romans built and rebuilt over centuries a public space that concentrated their most important functions. Here were the temples of the chief gods. Here were the law courts where cases were argued. Here stood the rostra, the curved platform from which orators addressed the Roman people, decorated with the bronze prows of ships captured in battle. Here was the treasury. Here were the record offices where laws and public documents were stored. And here, in the midst of all this civic activity, Romans gathered to talk, to conduct business, to watch the proceedings of the courts, to hear the latest political news, to meet friends and rivals. The Forum was not a formal space separated from ordinary life. It was ordinary life at its most public and most Roman. The Roman Republic entered its greatest period of external crisis in the 3rd century BCE, when it came into conflict with Carthage, the powerful city-state on the northern coast of Africa that controlled much of the western Mediterranean. The 3 wars that Rome and Carthage fought over roughly a century are known as the Punic Wars, and they were among the most consequential conflicts in ancient history. The second of these wars brought Rome the most dangerous adversary it ever faced. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general, led an army including war elephants across the Alps into Italy and won a series of devastating victories over Roman forces. For more than a decade, he moved through Italy, winning battle after battle, and Rome seemed on the verge of catastrophe. But the Roman system proved its resilience. Even in the darkest moments, Rome did not collapse. Its allies, most of them, held. New armies were raised. The war eventually moved to North Africa, where the Roman general Scipio defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. The victory over Carthage made Rome the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. A third war a generation later ended with the complete destruction of Carthage. The Romans salted the earth, as the saying goes, though historians debate whether that detail is literally true, and erased the city. Rome had learned what it meant to fight for survival, and it had survived. The Punic Wars forced Rome to become more than an Italian power. The First Punic War began over Sicily, an island rich in grain and strategically placed between Italy and North Africa. Rome had little experience as a naval power. Carthage, by contrast, was a maritime giant with fleets, harbors, and generations of seafaring expertise. If the war had been decided only by tradition, Carthage should have dominated the sea. But Rome answered in a characteristically stubborn way. It built fleets, learned naval warfare, and adapted the battle to its own strengths by using boarding devices that turned sea fights into something closer to land combat. Victory in the First Punic War brought Rome its first overseas province, Sicily. This was a turning point deeper than it may appear. Governing territory outside Italy required new administrative habits. Taxes, governors, provincial courts, grain shipments, local elites, and military garrisons became part of Rome's ordinary business. The city that had once fought neighbors across fields now had to manage island populations across the sea. Empire began not as a fully planned project, but as a consequence of victory. Hannibal's invasion in the Second Punic War became a nightmare Rome never forgot. The crossing of the Alps was astonishing, but the terror lay in what followed. At the battles of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and especially Cannae, Hannibal destroyed Roman armies with tactical brilliance. Cannae, in 216 BCE, was one of the worst defeats Rome ever suffered. Tens of thousands of Roman and allied soldiers died in a single day. Many states would have sued for peace after such a catastrophe. Rome did not. It refused negotiation, raised new armies, and continued. This refusal is one of the defining moments in Roman history. It was not mere courage. It was a political and social system capable of absorbing disaster. Families lost sons, fathers, brothers. The city must have been heavy with mourning. Yet the Senate stayed in session. Allies were courted. Commanders were replaced. Strategy changed. Instead of seeking immediate decisive battle, Rome wore Hannibal down while attacking Carthaginian interests elsewhere. The war became a test of endurance, and in endurance Rome found one of its greatest strengths. Scipio Africanus, the Roman commander who finally defeated Hannibal, represents a new kind of Roman greatness. He was bold, charismatic, and imaginative, taking the war to Spain and then to North Africa. His victory at Zama did not merely end a war. It shifted the balance of the Western Mediterranean. Carthage survived for a time, but it would never again be Rome's equal. Rome had faced its greatest danger and emerged larger, harder, and more confident. The destruction of Carthage in the Third Punic War is darker. By then, Carthage was no longer the existential threat it had been under Hannibal. Yet Roman fear, resentment, and ambition combined into a final war that ended with the city's destruction in 146 BCE. In the same year, Rome also destroyed Corinth in Greece. The date is symbolic. In 1 year, Rome stamped its authority on both the Western and Eastern Mediterranean worlds. The city by the Tiber had become the master of a sea the Romans would later call Mare Nostrum, our sea. But victory changed the victors. Wealth poured into Rome. Generals returned with spoils. Enslaved captives entered Italy in enormous numbers. Provincial taxation enriched businessmen. Senators competed for commands and honors. Greek art and literature entered Roman homes. Luxury increased, and with it came anxiety. Conservative Romans worried that old discipline was being softened by foreign influence and wealth. They were not entirely wrong, though nostalgia can turn the past into something simpler than it ever was. Rome's problem was not that it became rich. It was that its old republican structures struggled to manage the consequences of becoming rich. The Mediterranean Empire also pulled Rome into moral contradiction. Romans praised liberty while ruling provinces whose inhabitants had little control over governors sent from Rome. They celebrated law while provincial exploitation could be severe. They honored farming simplicity while great estates expanded. They feared kingship while allowing victorious commanders to acquire almost royal prestige abroad. The Republic had been made for a city and its Italian alliances. It now governed a world. That mismatch would define the century of crisis to come. As Rome's territory expanded, so did the complexity of the problems it faced. The flood of wealth from conquered provinces enriched some Romans enormously, while others sank into poverty. Italian farmers who had served in the long wars returned home to find their land absorbed into great estates worked by enslaved people, the captives of conquest, who could undercut the prices that free small farmers needed to survive. Landless Romans flooded into the cities, particularly Rome itself, creating an urban population that depended on state grain distributions and had little stake in the agricultural order that had once defined Roman life. The Senate, dominated by the wealthiest families, resisted reforms that might have addressed these problems. The result was a century of increasingly bitter political conflict, the period Romans themselves later called the crisis of the Republic, in which ambitious men discovered that armies loyal to their commanders rather than to the state could be used to resolve political disputes. Julius Caesar is perhaps the most famous Roman who ever lived, and the story of his life and death illuminates everything that was happening in the late Republic with particular clarity. He was a man of extraordinary ability, a brilliant military commander, a gifted writer whose accounts of his campaigns in Gaul remain among the most readable works from the ancient world, a skilled politician who understood the art of winning popular support, and an administrator of remarkable energy and vision. His conquest of Gaul between 58 and 50 BC extended Roman territory to the Rhine and the English Channel, brought enormous wealth to Rome, and created a battle-hardened army fanatically loyal to its general. When the Senate, fearful of his power, demanded that he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the river that marked the boundary between his province and Italy proper, with his army, an act of war against the state. After winning a civil war against his rivals, he became dictator of Rome, the most powerful man in the Roman world. And then, on the 15th of March in 44 BCE, the Ides of March, he was assassinated on the floor of the Senate by men who believed they were saving the Republic. Before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, others had already shown how fragile the Republic had become. The brothers Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus tried to address land inequality in the 2nd century BCE, arguing that Rome's citizen farmers were being displaced by large estates and that the Republic's military and moral strength depended on restoring land to ordinary citizens. Their reforms threatened powerful interests. Both brothers died violently, and Roman politics crossed a threshold. Political disagreement had always been fierce, but now blood had entered the forum. Marius, a brilliant general and outsider to the old aristocracy, reformed recruitment by allowing landless citizens to serve in the army. This helped Rome meet military needs, but it also deepened the personal bond between soldiers and commanders who could promise land and rewards. Sulla, another general, marched on Rome itself, an act that would once have seemed unthinkable. He seized power, became dictator, posted lists of enemies to be killed in the proscriptions, and tried to restore senatorial authority through force. The Republic survived Sulla, but not unchanged. A door had been opened. Spartacus, the gladiator who led a massive slave revolt in the 70s BCE, revealed another pressure point in Roman society. His rebellion began at a gladiatorial school in Capua and grew into a movement that terrified Italy. Thousands of enslaved people joined, and Roman armies struggled to contain them. The revolt was eventually crushed by Crassus, and thousands of survivors were crucified along the Appian Way. To Rome, it was a warning about the danger of slavery on a vast scale. To us, it is also a reminder of the human cost beneath Roman prosperity. Pompey the Great rose as one of the age's most celebrated commanders, clearing pirates from the Mediterranean and reorganizing the eastern territories of Rome. Crassus became immensely wealthy. Caesar joined with them in the First Triumvirate, an informal alliance of ambition that allowed the three men to dominate Roman politics. It had no place in the traditional constitution, but by then much of Roman politics worked through personal arrangements that stood beside or above formal law. The Republic's offices still existed. Elections still happened. The Senate still debated. But real power increasingly belonged to men who commanded armies, money, and popular support. Cicero watched this world with brilliance and fear. He believed deeply in the Republic, in law, in senatorial leadership, and in the power of speech. Yet he was also vain, anxious, ambitious, and often trapped by circumstances larger than himself. His letters make him one of the most human figures in Roman history. We hear him worry, boast, complain, calculate, grieve, and try to preserve dignity in a collapsing political order. Through Cicero, the late Republic stops being a sequence of names and becomes a living world of friendships, betrayals, debts, speeches, and sleepless nights. Caesar's conquest of Gaul brought him glory, wealth, and an army hardened by years of fighting. It also brought enormous suffering to the peoples of Gaul, whose resistance was crushed with Roman determination. Caesar's own commentaries present the campaigns with clear, controlled prose, making Roman decisions seem rational and necessary. But behind the elegance of his writing lay sieges, massacres, enslavement, and the remaking of entire regions. Rome's greatness often came wrapped in language of order and civilization, but it was carried by violence. The crossing of the Rubicon was therefore dramatic not only because Caesar broke a law. It was dramatic because everyone understood what it meant. A Roman commander was bringing his army into Italy against the authority of the state. The river itself was small. The act was immense. From that moment, compromise became nearly impossible. The Republic, already wounded by decades of crisis, entered its final struggle. Caesar's dictatorship was energetic. He reformed the calendar, settled veterans, enlarged the Senate, planned building projects, relieved debt pressures, and looked toward further campaigns. Some saw him as the only man capable of restoring order. Others saw a king in all but name. The assassins who struck him down believed that liberty required his death. Yet they misunderstood the age. The Republic had not been held down by Caesar alone. It had become unable to contain the forces it had created. When Caesar fell, those forces did not disappear. They rushed into the space he left behind. The assassination of Caesar did not save the Republic. It destroyed it. The conspirators had killed one man, but had not addressed any of the underlying problems that had made his rise to power possible. Within months, Rome was again at war with itself. Caesar's heir and adopted son, Octavian, his trusted general Mark Antony, and Caesar's lieutenant Lepidus formed an alliance, the Second Triumvirate, that hunted down Caesar's killers and then turned on each other. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's forces defeated those of Antony and his ally Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. Antony and Cleopatra both died by their own hands, and Octavian stood alone as master of the Roman world. What Octavian did next was one of the most consequential political acts in history, and it was accomplished with characteristic cleverness. He did not declare himself king. The Romans would never have accepted that, carrying as they did centuries of deep aversion to the very word. Instead, he presented himself as the restorer of the Republic, the man who had brought peace after decades of civil war, the first citizen, princeps, who governed not by force but by the weight of his authority and the trust placed in him by the Senate and the Roman people. In practice, he held powers that made him the undisputed ruler of the Roman world. But the fiction of republican government was maintained, and the Romans, exhausted by a century of conflict, accepted it with something close to relief. He took the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and became the first Roman emperor in all but name. The long history of the Roman Empire had begun. Augustus understood what Caesar's killers had not understood. Romans might reject the name of king, but they longed for peace. Decades of civil war had exhausted the elite and the people alike. Families had been divided, property confiscated, armies marched across Roman lands. Proscriptions had turned politics into terror. Augustus offered not a return to the old republic as it had truly functioned, but the feeling of restoration. He allowed old names to remain. Consuls, senators, assemblies, and traditional offices continued. But the center of gravity had shifted quietly and permanently toward one man. This political arrangement, often called the Principate, was one of Rome's most subtle inventions. Augustus collected powers rather than a single royal title. He held tribunician power, giving him the ability to intervene and present himself as protector of the people. He held imperium, giving him military authority. He controlled the key provinces where most legions were stationed. He was princeps, first among citizens, and later pater patriae, father of the fatherland. The forms of the Republic survived like familiar furniture in a remodeled house. Romans could tell themselves that they had not returned to monarchy. In a legal sense, perhaps they had not. In practical terms, one man's authority stood above all others. Augustus also understood the power of culture. Poets, historians, architects, priests, and artists all helped shape the new age. Virgil's Aeneid connected Rome to Troy, destiny, suffering, and divine mission. Livy wrote Rome's history as a vast moral archive of examples to imitate or avoid. Monuments rose across the city. Temples were restored. Public rituals were revived. Family morality was legislated. The message was clear. The violence of the late Republic had ended, and Rome had found its proper order again. The imperial family became part of public life in a new way. Augustus promoted images of stability, marriage, fertility, and succession, but his own household brought grief and complication. Intended heirs died. His daughter Julia was exiled. Political necessity and family pain intertwined. The problem of succession would haunt the empire because Rome never developed a perfectly stable constitutional way to transfer imperial power. Blood, adoption, army support, Senate recognition, palace intrigue, and public image all mattered. A peaceful succession could make the empire seem eternal. A disputed one could open the door to civil war. Under Augustus and his successors, provincial life became one of the empire's great strengths. Local elites in Spain, Gaul, North Africa, Greece, Syria, and elsewhere found that cooperation with Rome could bring honor, office, citizenship, and wealth. They built forums, baths, theaters, temples, and aqueducts in Roman style, not simply because Rome forced them to, but because Roman public culture became the language of status. To be important in a provincial town often meant to build something useful and beautiful for the community and inscribe your name upon it. Romanization was never one simple process. People did not stop being local overnight. A person in Gaul might honor Roman gods and local gods together. A family in North Africa might speak Punic at home and Latin in public. A Greek city might remain proudly Greek while also serving the imperial system. Rome's empire worked partly because it did not demand complete sameness. It demanded loyalty, taxes, public order, and respect for imperial authority. Beneath that, many local identities endured and adapted. Citizenship became the empire's most powerful tool of inclusion. At first, Roman citizenship was limited and precious. Over time, it spread through colonies, military service, elite grants, and municipal advancement. In 212 CE, the Emperor Caracalla issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants of the empire. The reasons were partly fiscal and political, but the symbolic meaning was immense. The Roman people had become an imperial population. What began on 7 hills had expanded into a legal identity stretching across continents. The emperor himself became a distant presence in most people's lives, but a powerful one. His image appeared on coins. His name was spoken in oaths. His statues stood in forums and temples. His birthday might be celebrated. His victories were announced. His laws reached provinces through governors and documents. Many subjects would never see him, but they handled coins bearing his face and lived under decisions made in his name. The empire turned one human figure into a symbol that could travel everywhere. Augustus ruled for 44 years, from 27 BCE to 14 CE, and the transformation he oversaw was profound. He reorganized the Roman army, establishing it as a professional permanent force with standard pay, standard equipment, and a defined period of service. He created the Praetorian Guard, a special force of elite troops stationed in Rome itself as a permanent military presence near the center of power. He reformed the administration of the provinces, establishing a distinction between those governed directly by the Senate and those, particularly the frontier provinces with large military forces, governed by his own appointed representatives. He rebuilt Rome on an enormous scale. He famously claimed to have found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He organized fire brigades and a police force. He established a postal system, the cursus publicus, that used relay stations along the Roman roads to carry official messages and dispatches across the empire with remarkable speed. Under Augustus, Rome became not just the capital of a republic, but the capital of a world. The peace that Augustus established, and that his successors largely maintained for the next 2 centuries, is known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It is a phrase that deserves unpacking carefully, because it was peace in a particular sense. The frontiers of the empire were not static, and the peoples living within the empire did not all experience Roman rule as peaceful or welcome. There were revolts, suppressions, and continuing violence along the edges of the empire and beyond. But for the vast interior of the Roman world, for the farmers of North Africa, the merchants of Syria, the potters of Gaul, the shipbuilders of Greece, the centuries of the Pax Romana brought something genuinely valuable: the ability to move goods across great distances without fear of disruption, the security of a legal system that, imperfectly, unequally, but genuinely, provided recourse against arbitrary violence, and the physical infrastructure of roads, harbors, and cities that made economic life possible on a scale previously unimaginable. Trade within the Roman Empire reached a sophistication and scale that would not be seen again in the Western world for more than 1,000 years after Rome's fall. A merchant in Alexandria could ship grain to Ostia, receive payment in silver coins minted in Rome, and use those same coins to purchase Syrian purple cloth that had been dyed using a process developed in Phoenicia centuries before. Spanish olive oil traveled to Britain. British tin made its way to the workshops of the Eastern Mediterranean. Chinese silk arrived in Rome via the Parthian middlemen of the Silk Road. Indian spices and pepper, enormously expensive and passionately desired, reached Roman kitchens from the ports of the Red Sea. The Roman economy was not isolated or self-sufficient. It was plugged into trade networks that stretched from Ireland to India, and the coins, the contracts, the ships, and the roads that Rome provided made this commerce possible. The Roman legal system is perhaps the most durable and far-reaching of all Rome's contributions to the world. Roman law, developed over centuries from the early 12 tables, a set of basic legal principles inscribed on 12 bronze tablets and displayed in the Forum around 450 BCE, to the great legal compilations of the imperial period, provided a framework for resolving disputes, protecting property, regulating contracts, and defining the relationship between individuals and the state. The principles embedded in Roman law, the presumption of innocence, the right to confront one's accusers, the idea that law should be written and public rather than arbitrary, traveled with Roman civilization and survived its fall. When the European kingdoms of the medieval period began to develop their legal systems, they drew heavily on Roman law. When modern democratic states wrote their constitutions, they reached back, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, to ideas that Roman lawyers had first articulated. The reach of Roman legal thinking is almost impossible to exaggerate. Roman law grew not because Romans were unusually gentle, but because they were unusually serious about form, procedure, and precedent. A contract needed witnesses. A will needed proper wording. A magistrate needed authority. A citizen had rights, but those rights had to be invoked through recognized channels. This could be rigid, even cold, yet it gave Roman society a durable framework. People argued not only with fists or favors, but with documents, formulas, appeals, and claims about what had been done before. The figure of the jurist became important in the imperial period. Jurists were legal experts whose opinions helped clarify difficult questions. They did not simply memorize rules. They reasoned about cases, categories, obligations, ownership, inheritance, and responsibility. Their work shaped later legal traditions because it treated law as a disciplined intellectual craft. Centuries after emperors were gone from the West, the reasoning of Roman jurists still guided medieval scholars who rediscovered and studied Roman legal texts. Law also reveals the boundaries of Roman equality. Citizens had privileges that non-citizens lacked. Free people stood above enslaved people. Men held legal advantages over women in many areas, though Roman women could own property and act with more independence than women in some other ancient societies. Wealth and status shaped outcomes, as they often do in every legal system. Still, The idea that law should have public form, that rights could be claimed, and that authority should be justified through recognized procedures became one of Rome's most consequential inheritances. The Latin language carried this legal mind into the future. Latin can be compact, formal, and precise. Roman public inscriptions often speak with a spare authority that still feels official: names, offices, deeds, dedications, decrees. A stone inscription might record the rebuilding of a bridge, the gift of a bathhouse, the career of a local magistrate, or the grief of parents for a child. In a world without newspapers, these inscriptions turned public space into an archive. Walls spoke, tombs spoke, milestones spoke. The state and its people wrote themselves into stone. Literacy in Rome was uneven, but writing was everywhere. Wax tablets allowed temporary notes. Papyrus carried letters, accounts, and literature. Graffiti covered walls. Labels marked amphorae of oil, wine, and fish sauce. Soldiers wrote reports. Merchants kept accounts. Children practiced alphabets. The empire depended on written communication, and that habit of documentation allowed fragments of ordinary life to survive. A shopping list can sometimes feel more intimate than a triumphal arch. The postal and transport systems of the empire served official needs first, but they also helped create a sense of connected space. Messages could travel by road and sea through relay stations, ports, and administrative centers. The Mediterranean, once a field of rival powers, became a Roman lake in practical terms. Ships still sank. Storms still killed. Pirates did not vanish completely, but compared with earlier periods, movement across the empire became more reliable. The world felt larger because Rome connected it, and smaller for the same reason. Time itself became Roman in many places. Calendars, imperial anniversaries, tax cycles, legal terms, market days, military service years, and civic festivals structured life across provinces. The Julian calendar, introduced under Caesar, corrected earlier confusion and gave Rome a more stable system of measuring the year. Later refinements would lead to the calendar many of us still use. Even when we glance at a month named July or August, we are moving through time with Roman names quietly attached. The Latin language, the tongue of the Romans, is another legacy of extraordinary reach. Latin was the language of administration, law, literature, and the educated classes throughout the Western Empire. As Roman power spread, Latin spread with it, not replacing local languages overnight, but gradually displacing them in official contexts and then in everyday life. Over the centuries following Rome's decline, the Latin spoken in different regions of the former empire evolved in different directions, shaped by local geography, local languages, and local circumstances. From these regional varieties of spoken Latin descended the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and Catalan, among others. Roughly 1 billion people in the world today speak a language descended directly from Latin. And even in languages not directly descended from it, English, German, Polish, Turkish, the influence of Latin is felt in thousands of borrowed words, in legal and scientific terminology, in the names of months and days, in the vocabulary of religion and philosophy. The emperors who followed Augustus varied enormously in their character, their abilities, and their approaches to power. The period from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, roughly 2 centuries, is sometimes called the era of the 5 good emperors, though the phrase covers an uneven reality. Tiberius, the successor of Augustus, was a capable administrator who retreated from public life and ended his reign in a climate of paranoia and suspicion. Caligula is remembered for erratic and cruel behavior, though the historical sources that describe him were written by members of the senatorial class he antagonized, and the full truth of his reign remains difficult to assess. Claudius was mocked for his physical awkwardness, but proved to be a surprisingly effective administrator who expanded Roman territory to include Britain. Nero is remembered for the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, which he almost certainly did not cause, though he did use the cleared space to build his enormous palace, the Domus Aurea, and for the persecution of Christians in its aftermath. These rulers were real people, with real contradictions, operating within a system that gave them enormous power and almost no accountability. The city of Pompeii, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, provides the single most vivid and complete picture we have of life in a Roman provincial town at the height of the empire. Pompeii was not a great city. It had perhaps 11,000 inhabitants, but it was a typical one, a prosperous town in a fertile agricultural region with a forum, temples, bathhouses, a large theater, an amphitheater, workshops producing wool and ceramics, wine bars, bakeries, and the full range of urban life. The volcanic ash that buried it also preserved it. Walking through Pompeii today, and millions of people do every year, is to walk through streets where the ruts worn by cartwheels are still visible in the stone, where electoral graffiti urging votes for particular candidates can still be read on plastered walls, where the remains of the last meal eaten in a thermopolium, a Roman fast food establishment, still sit in their clay containers. The humanity of Pompeii is overwhelming. It is not an archaeological site in the abstract. It is a place where people lived very recently in geological time, and where their traces are everywhere. Pompeii also reminds us that Roman religion, commerce, and domestic life lived side by side. A shop might have a small shrine painted near the entrance. A bakery might show the tools of its trade. A house might display mythological frescoes in rooms used for entertaining guests, while the kitchen and slave quarters remained cramped and plain. Beauty and inequality were not separated into different worlds. They occupied the same walls. The eruption of Vesuvius was sudden in human terms, though the mountain had given signs that people did not fully understand. Earthquakes had damaged Pompeii years earlier, and repairs were still underway when the eruption came. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay, later described the cloud rising from the mountain in the shape of a pine tree, dark and enormous. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, a commander of the fleet and a man of scientific curiosity, sailed toward the danger and died during the catastrophe. Through Pliny's letters, the disaster becomes both public event and personal memory. The victims of Pompeii and Herculaneum make the past painfully close. Casts made from voids left in hardened ash show bodies in their final positions. A person covering the face, a family huddled together, a dog twisted in its chain. It is important not to turn these people into spectacle. They were not symbols when they died. They were inhabitants of a town who woke up on an ordinary day and met something beyond imagining. The preservation that teaches us so much came at the cost of their final terror. Herculaneum, buried by volcanic flows rather than only ash fall, preserves another side of the disaster. Wooden furniture, doors, beds, shelves, and even food survived in carbonized form. Scrolls from the Villa of the Papyri were blackened but not entirely destroyed, and modern imaging continues to try to read texts that have been closed for nearly 2,000 years. It is a strange thought. Words written in the Roman world, burned and buried, still waiting to be heard again through technologies their authors could never have imagined. In Pompeii streets, politics appears at a local scale. Electoral notices painted on walls recommend candidates for office. Some are endorsed by guilds, neighbors, or groups with a sense of humor. Local politics mattered because Roman civic life was built from cities. The empire was enormous, but daily belonging often centered on the town, its baths, temples, council, market, festivals, and rival families. A man could be loyal to Rome, proud of his province, and deeply invested in the status of his own city all at once. The Thermopolium, often compared to a snack bar, reveals the pace of urban life. Not everyone had a large kitchen at home, especially those living in cramped apartments. People bought hot food, wine, bread, olives, and simple dishes from counters opening onto the street. The Roman city ate in public as well as private. It talked, bargained, gossiped, and watched. The walls listened, and in Pompeii, the walls remembered. Pompeii was not frozen in a perfect Roman moment. It was a town in motion, damaged by earthquake, still repairing, full of social differences, political notices, religious changes, and commercial energy. That is part of its value. It does not show an ideal Rome. It shows a living one. And because it was interrupted so suddenly, it gives us something history rarely gives. Not only what people chose to preserve, but what happened to be present when time stopped. The graffiti of Pompeii and other Roman sites deserve a moment of particular attention because they offer something that official Roman sources rarely provide: the voices of ordinary people. Not senators or generals or philosophers, but bakers and gladiators and lovers and students and bored people waiting for something to happen. The walls of Pompeii are covered in inscriptions, electoral slogans, business advertisements, declarations of love, insults, jokes, shopping lists, quotations from literature, the records of gambling debts. One inscription announces the schedule of the local baths. Another records the result of a gladiatorial contest. A third, poignant in its simplicity, reads, "I was here." These marks, scratched into plaster by unknown hands 2,000 years ago, compress the distance between then and now until it almost disappears. The gladiatorial games are among the most discussed and most misunderstood aspects of Roman culture. They were real, and they were violent. It would be false to minimize that. But they were also considerably more complex than the popular image suggests. Gladiators were not exclusively enslaved people fighting against their will. Many were volunteers, drawn by the promise of payment, fame, and the adulation of the crowd. Successful gladiators were celebrities, their faces reproduced on lamps and cups and mosaics, their names scratched admiringly on walls. A gladiatorial career was dangerous, but it was a career with training, status, and the possibility of retirement. The games themselves were embedded in Roman religious and civic life. They were originally associated with funeral rites and later became part of the apparatus of public beneficence, through which wealthy Romans demonstrated their generosity to the population. The crowds that watched were not simply bloodthirsty. They followed the games with the informed attention of sports fans, appreciating technique and style as much as violence. None of this makes the games comfortable to contemplate from a modern perspective, but it makes them more comprehensible as part of a human world. The Colosseum, its proper name was the Flavian Amphitheater, was built in the decade between 70 and 80 CE, under the emperors Vespasian and Titus, on the site of the artificial lake that had been part of Nero's private palace. Its construction involved tens of thousands of workers, including Jewish prisoners brought to Rome after the suppression of the revolt in Judea. When it was completed, it could seat somewhere between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, arranged in tiers according to social rank: senators at the front, ordinary citizens above, women and the poor at the very top. The building's engineering was as impressive as its scale. A network of corridors, staircases, and ramps allowed enormous crowds to enter and exit quickly and without chaos. Awnings, the velarium, were deployed over the seating area to shade the crowd from the sun. The arena floor could be flooded for mock naval battles or specially fitted for different types of spectacle. The Colosseum is today the most visited ancient monument in the world. 2,000 years after it was built, it still draws its crowds. Roman religion was not a simple or uniform phenomenon. In its earliest form, Roman religion was primarily concerned with maintaining the proper relationship between the community and a complex array of divine forces, not anthropomorphic gods with dramatic personalities, but powers that inhabited specific places, objects, and functions. The genius of the head of household needed to be honored. The lares, household spirits, needed their regular offerings. The Penates protected the family's food stores. As Rome expanded and came into contact with other cultures, it absorbed their gods. Greek gods were identified with their Roman equivalents. Eastern mystery religions found followers in Rome. Egyptian Isis attracted devoted worshippers. Roman religious tolerance was generally broad. As long as you performed the civic religious duties expected of you, you could worship privately according to whatever tradition you chose. This is why the early Christians, who refused to participate in the imperial cult, were seen not merely as religious nonconformists, but as civic troublemakers. Roman religion was also a religion of place. A spring, a grove, a boundary stone, a hearth, a doorway, a crossroads, each could carry sacred attention. The Romans did not always seek the divine far away. They found it in functions, thresholds, transitions, and repeated acts of care. A household shrine might receive small offerings of wine, incense, or food. A farmer might honor gods of fields and boundaries. A soldier might pray to Jupiter, Mars, Mithras, local deities, and the spirit of the emperor without feeling a contradiction that would trouble a later theological mind. The imperial cult deserves careful explanation. Worship of the emperor, or of the emperor's genius and the divine power of the imperial office, was not always a claim that the living emperor was a god in the simplest sense. It was a public language of loyalty, gratitude, and unity. In provinces, temples to Rome and Augustus allowed local elites to participate in imperial identity. Sacrifice for the emperor's welfare marked allegiance to the order that held the empire together. This is why refusal could seem politically dangerous. Religion and civic loyalty were intertwined. Mystery religions offered something more personal. The cult of Isis promised protection and a close relationship with a powerful goddess whose Egyptian origins had been reshaped for the wider Mediterranean. The cult of Mithras, especially popular among soldiers and officials, involved initiation, shared meals, and symbolic imagery of the gods slaying the bull. The cult of Cybele brought ecstatic music and old Anatolian power into Roman religious life. The empire was a great collector of gods, not because Romans had no identity of their own, but because they believed power could be honored in many forms. Judaism held a special and difficult place inside the empire. Jewish communities existed across the Mediterranean, with deep roots in Judea and large diasporic populations in cities such as Alexandria and Rome. Roman authorities often recognized Jewish ancestral customs, but tensions could become severe when imperial power touched sacred law, temple authority, taxation, and local governance. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE after the Jewish Revolt was one of the most devastating events in Jewish history. It also shaped the world from which Christianity would emerge and spread. Early Christianity began as a small Jewish movement in a Roman-ruled province and became, over centuries, the religion of the empire. Its spread was not simple or uniform. Communities formed in cities, meeting in houses, reading letters, caring for widows and the poor, debating doctrine, and defining themselves in relation to both Jewish tradition and Roman society. The message of a crucified and risen Christ sounded strange and sometimes scandalous in the Roman world, where crucifixion was a punishment of shame. Yet the faith offered belonging, hope, moral seriousness, and a promise that the weak and humble were seen by God. Persecutions were real, but they were not constant everywhere at all times. They came in waves, often shaped by local hostility or imperial policy during moments of crisis. To many Roman officials, the problem was not private belief, but refusal to participate in public religious acts that signaled loyalty. Christians who would not sacrifice could be seen as stubborn, antisocial, or impious. The stories of martyrs, preserved and retold by Christian communities, transformed suffering into witness. Rome used death to enforce order. Christians remembered death as testimony. Constantine's conversion did not instantly make the empire Christian in every heart and village, but it changed the direction of history. Christian bishops gained influence. Churches received patronage. Councils debated doctrine with imperial involvement. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, called under Constantine, addressed theological disputes that mattered deeply to Christian identity. The empire that had once executed Christians now helped define the terms of orthodox belief. This was not simply a religious change. It altered art, law, politics, patronage, timekeeping, and the moral language of power. By the end of the 4th century, under Theodosius I, Christianity had become the dominant official religion of the Roman state, and traditional public cults lost imperial support. Temples closed or were transformed. Sacrifices were restricted. Old festivals changed meaning or faded. But religious change is rarely clean. Old habits persisted. Local traditions adapted. Sacred places were reinterpreted. The Roman world did not stop being Roman when it became Christian. It carried old administrative, legal, linguistic, and urban forms into a new religious age. The spread of Christianity through the Roman Empire is one of the most remarkable stories in human history, and Rome's role in it is paradoxical. Rome persecuted Christians in several periods: under Nero, under Domitian, and in the Great Persecution under Diocletian in the early 4th century. Christians were killed in the arenas and in other terrible ways. And yet Rome also, inadvertently, created the conditions that allowed Christianity to spread, the roads that missionaries traveled, the common language that the Gospels and letters were written in, the urban networks that linked communities across the empire, and the legal structures that, imperfectly and inconsistently, could be invoked in defense of the accused. When the Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in the early 4th century CE, and when the Edict of Milan in 313 CE established religious tolerance throughout the empire, it was the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the civilization of Europe for the next 2,000 years. The Romans built aqueducts, systems for carrying water over long distances, that remain among the most impressive engineering achievements of the ancient world. Rome itself was served by 11 major aqueducts, together delivering hundreds of millions of liters of water into the city every day. This water-fed public fountains scattered throughout the city, at which even the poorest residents could fill their containers, as well as the great public baths, the private homes of the wealthy, and the countless workshops and businesses that needed water in their processes. The aqueducts ran partly underground, partly along elevated stone arches that are still visible in the Roman countryside today. Long, elegant structures striding across the landscape, carrying their water forward with an unhurried regularity that feels almost meditative. Some of these aqueducts served cities that are still inhabited today, and portions of the ancient system remain in use or were used until relatively recently. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 161 to 180 CE, is one of the most singular figures in the history of the Roman Empire. He was a Stoic philosopher, a believer in a philosophical tradition that emphasized reason, self-discipline, acceptance of what cannot be changed, and service to others as the highest human calling. And he was simultaneously the most powerful man in the world, responsible for defending an empire under pressure on multiple fronts and managing an administration of continental scope. His private journal, known as the Meditations, written in Greek and never intended for publication, has survived and is still read today. In it, a man of enormous power talks quietly to himself about how to be better, how to accept difficulty with equanimity, how to remember that power and fame and wealth are transient, how to treat other people justly even when they are frustrating or unkind. There is something quietly extraordinary about a Roman emperor sitting in his tent on the frontier, writing to himself about the importance of humility. The Meditations is one of the most human documents from the ancient world. Marcus Aurelius also ruled during trouble. The Antonine Plague, likely brought back by soldiers from eastern campaigns, swept through the empire and killed many people, though the exact numbers remain uncertain. Disease does not leave triumphal arches, but it can change history as deeply as war. It weakens armies, disrupts trade, empties households, frightens cities, and forces rulers to confront the limits of power. The emperor who wrote about accepting fate had to govern in a world where fate seemed unusually heavy. His son Commodus, who succeeded him, became a symbol in later Roman writing of decline after virtue. Ancient sources portray him as self-indulgent, cruel, and obsessed with appearing as a gladiator and Hercules-like figure. As always with hostile sources, we must read carefully. Yet his reign did mark a change in tone after the relative stability of adoptive succession. The empire survived Commodus, but the question of imperial character returned. If one man held such power, what happened when that man was foolish, frightened, or cruel? The 3rd century brought the empire close to breaking. Emperors rose and fell rapidly, often proclaimed by armies and murdered by rivals. Frontiers came under intense pressure. The Sassanid Persian Empire in the east proved a formidable enemy. Germanic groups crossed the Rhine and Danube. Economic strain, inflation, debased coinage, plague, civil war, and administrative overload all struck together. At one point, the empire effectively split into separate regions. The Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene power of Queen Zenobia in the east, and the central Roman state struggling to hold the whole together. Yet Rome did not collapse in the 3rd century. This is important. It adapted again. Emperors such as Aurelian restored unity by force, defeating breakaway powers and strengthening defenses. Diocletian later reorganized the empire more systematically, dividing authority among multiple emperors in a system known as the Tetrarchy. The idea was practical. The empire was too large and threatened on too many fronts for one ruler to manage easily from one center. Multiple emperors could respond faster to crises. The system did not last as intended, but it shows how seriously Roman rulers understood the problem of scale. Diocletian also reformed taxation, administration, and the military, creating a more rigid and bureaucratic empire. To some, this later Roman state feels less elegant than the world of Augustus. It was heavier, more formal, more hierarchical, but it was responding to a harsher age. The empire of marble forums and confident expansion had become an empire of defense, supply, and survival. Its greatness was no longer expressed mainly through conquest. It was expressed through the effort to endure. Constantine emerged from the struggles after the Tetrarchy and founded a new capital at Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, on a superb strategic site between Europe and Asia, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. This decision changed the center of Roman gravity. Constantinople was not a rejection of Rome so much as a recognition that the empire's future lay increasingly in the east, where wealth, population, and strategic threats demanded attention. The city would become one of the greatest capitals in world history, and for more than 1,000 years, its rulers would continue to call themselves Romans. The division between eastern and western halves of the empire became increasingly important. The east was wealthier, more urbanized, and often better able to withstand pressure. The West faced severe military and fiscal problems, with long frontiers, powerful military commanders, and increasing reliance on federate groups. Allied barbarian peoples settled inside imperial territory in exchange for military service. The word barbarian can mislead us. These groups were not simply wild outsiders. They had leaders, diplomacy, ambitions, and long histories of contact with Rome. Many had served in Roman armies. Many wanted a place inside the Roman world, not merely its destruction. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410 CE shocked the Mediterranean imagination. Rome had not been the main imperial residence for some time, but symbolically it remained immense. For a foreign army to enter and plunder the city was almost unthinkable. Christian and pagan writers alike tried to interpret what it meant. Was it divine punishment? Political failure? The turning of an age? Augustine's City of God was partly written in response to this crisis, arguing that no earthly city, not even Rome, could be eternal in the way human beings longed for. In 455, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals. In 476, the last Western emperor was deposed. But even then, people did not wake up the next morning in a world without Rome. A senator might still own land. A bishop might still administer charity. A farmer still planted. A tax record might still be kept. Latin still sounded in churches and documents. Roman law still mattered. The fall of the West was not one door slamming shut. It was a long dimming, a transfer of authority, a reorganization of power into new hands. The frontiers of the Roman Empire were not fixed lines so much as zones of interaction and negotiation. Along the Rhine and Danube in the north, Roman forts and watchtowers faced the Germanic world, a world of forests and tribal confederacies that Rome never fully conquered and that posed the most persistent military challenge to the empire throughout its later history. Along the eastern frontier, Rome faced the Parthian Empire and later the Sassanid Persian Empire, sophisticated, powerful, and capable of inflicting serious defeats on Roman armies. In Britain, Hadrian's Wall, built by the Emperor Hadrian in the early 2nd century CE across the width of northern Britain, marked the northern limit of Roman control on that island. Stretching approximately 117 kilometers from coast to coast, the wall was not simply a defensive barrier, but a complex of forts, watchtowers, and gates through which movement could be controlled and taxed. Large sections of it still stand today, and walking along it, as many people do, is to walk along the edge of an empire. The Roman army on the frontiers was not only a military force, but a community, a culture, and an engine of Romanization. Soldiers who completed their service received a diploma, a bronze certificate, confirming their service and granting citizenship to them and their families if they did not already have it. Military camps on the frontiers gradually attracted civilian settlements, traders, craftsmen, innkeepers, the families of soldiers, that grew into towns, and some of those towns grew into major cities. York in Britain, Cologne in Germany, Vienna in Austria, Budapest in Hungary. All of these modern cities have their origins in Roman military settlements. The army was not just a fighting force. It was a mechanism through which Roman civilization spread into new territories and took root. The Roman economy included not only large-scale trade, but a rich tradition of craft production. Potters in Arretium, modern Arezzo in Tuscany, produced a distinctive red-glazed pottery known as terra sigillata that was traded across the entire empire and beyond. Glassblowers in Syria developed techniques for blowing thin, transparent glass that transformed the possibilities of the craft and produced vessels of extraordinary delicacy. Metalworkers crafted bronze statues, iron tools and weapons, silver plate, and the vast quantities of copper and silver coins that circulated through the Roman economy. Weavers produced linen and wool cloth in workshops and in homes. Builders worked constantly, in Rome and in every provincial city, constructing and maintaining the temples, theaters, baths, forums, and insulae that defined the Roman urban environment. The Roman economy was, in its essentials, a human economy of skilled hands and organized labor, and its traces are everywhere in the archaeological record. The Roman poets and writers produced a body of literature that has shaped the imagination of Western civilization from their own time to the present. Virgil's Aeneid, the epic poem commissioned by Augustus to provide Rome with a founding myth comparable to Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, tells the story of the Trojan hero Aeneas, who travels the Mediterranean and ultimately reaches Italy to lay the foundations of the Roman people. Ovid's Metamorphoses gathered the myths of the Greek and Roman world into a vast, playful, endlessly inventive retelling that became one of the most influential books in European literature. Cicero's philosophical essays and political speeches defined Latin prose style for centuries. Livy's vast history of Rome, Tacitus's sharp and mordant accounts of the emperors, Suetonius's entertaining biographical sketches of the Caesars. All of these helped shape how Romans understood themselves, and all of them are still read. The Romans built harbors wherever they settled near the sea, and some of these engineering works were as impressive as anything they built on land. The harbor at Caesarea Maritima on the coast of modern Israel, built by Herod the Great in collaboration with Roman engineers in the 1st century BCE, used pozzolanic concrete to construct breakwaters that extended far into the sea, the first large-scale use of concrete in a marine environment. The port of Ostia at the mouth of the Tiber served Rome for centuries, eventually developing into a major city in its own right with warehouses, offices, apartments, and all the infrastructure of a thriving commercial hub. The ruins of Ostia survive in remarkable condition and provide, along with Pompeii, the most complete picture we have of a Roman city at ground level. The decline of the Roman Empire is a subject that has occupied historians for centuries, and the great historian Edward Gibbon devoted 6 volumes to it in the 18th century. There is no single answer. The Western Empire, the Latin-speaking half centered on Rome, gradually fragmented over the 4th and 5th centuries CE under a combination of pressures, the increasing difficulty and cost of defending frontiers against incursions by various Germanic peoples, the economic strains of maintaining an enormous military establishment, the administrative challenges of governing so vast a territory, the disruptions caused by epidemic disease, the shifting of wealth and population toward the Eastern, Greek-speaking half of the empire, and internal political instability as emperors succeeded each other with increasing rapidity. The Eastern Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly another 1,000 years after the fall of the West, centered on Constantinople, preserving much of Roman law, culture, and administration in a transformed form. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we often call Byzantine, continued long after the Western imperial court disappeared. Its people did not think of themselves as Byzantines. They called themselves Romans. They preserved Roman law, imperial ceremony, taxation, military organization, and a Christian vision of empire centered on Constantinople. Justinian in the 6th century attempted to restore Roman rule over parts of the Western Mediterranean, reconquering North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain, though the effort strained the empire deeply. His great legal compilation, the Corpus Juris Civilis, preserved and organized Roman law in a form that would later transform European legal history. The Hagia Sophia, built under Justinian in Constantinople, shows how Roman engineering and Christian sacred architecture could merge into something new. Its dome seemed to float on light. Visitors in the 6th century were stunned by the space, the glittering mosaics, the marble, the sense that heaven had been translated into architecture. This was still Rome, but not the Rome of the Old Forum. It was Greek-speaking, Christian, Eastern, ceremonial, and transformed. Civilizations survive not by remaining unchanged, but by carrying identity through change. In the West, the memory of Rome became political treasure. Kings sought Roman titles. The papacy inherited the city and much of its symbolic authority. Monasteries copied Latin texts. Bishops governed communities using habits shaped by Roman administration. Roads decayed in places but remained useful. Walls were reused. Temples became churches. Amphitheaters became fortresses or quarries. Roman stones entered medieval buildings, not only physically but imaginatively. The old empire became a storehouse of legitimacy. Charlemagne's coronation in the year 800 as emperor in Rome shows how powerful that memory remained. More than 3 centuries after the Western imperial line had ended, the idea of Roman Empire still carried unmatched prestige. Later rulers of the Holy Roman Empire would claim connection to Rome. Renaissance humanists would study Latin texts as models of style and wisdom. Modern republics would borrow Roman symbols, senators, capitals, eagles, fasces, domes, arches, inscriptions, civic virtue, and warnings against tyranny. Rome's influence is visible even where people do not notice it. A courthouse with columns. A legislative chamber called a senate. A city square that functions like a forum. A language descended from Latin spoken across continents. A legal phrase preserved in Latin. A calendar month named for Julius or Augustus. A road following the line of an older Roman road. A church built inside the shell of a temple. A bridge whose arch repeats a Roman solution to the problem of stone and weight. Rome remains because it became part of the basic grammar of public life. Yet we should not make Rome too comfortable. It was brilliant and brutal. It built law and practiced slavery. It praised citizenship and excluded millions. It created peace and maintained it by force. It gave cities water, roads, and baths, while also staging spectacles of violence. Its greatness and its cruelty are not separate stories. They are woven together. To understand Rome honestly is to hold both in the mind. The grandeur of the Pantheon and the fear of the arena, the elegance of law and the chains of conquest, the poetry of Virgil and the smoke of burned cities. Perhaps this is why Rome continues to fascinate us. It is close enough to recognize and distant enough to unsettle. Romans wrote letters, worried about elections, complained about noise, celebrated festivals, sued neighbors, loved children, feared illness, chased status, and wondered how to live well. They also inhabited a world of household gods, public executions, emperors, omens, patronage, slavery, and conquest. They are familiar and strange at the same time. That mixture keeps their world alive in the imagination. If ancient Egypt gives us the dream of eternity, Rome gives us the dream of order built by human hands. Roads measured, laws written, cities supplied, armies disciplined, citizens counted, speeches recorded, arches raised, calendars fixed. It is a different dream, more civic than cosmic, more legal than mystical, but no less powerful. Rome wanted the world to be arranged. It wanted distance to become road, conflict to become law, victory to become monument, memory to become inscription. It did not always succeed, but the attempt changed history. And beneath that great public order were private lives. A girl learning letters from a wax tablet. A veteran touching the diploma that made him a citizen. A baker rising before dawn. A mother leaving a small toy at a child's grave. A sailor watching the lighthouse at Ostia. A prisoner hearing the crowd above the arena. A philosopher emperor writing to himself in the cold of a military camp. A Christian whispering prayers in a house church. A farmer in Gaul paying taxes in a world governed by a city he would never see. Rome was enormous, but it was lived one human life at a time. The stones survive because stone is patient, but the softer things survive too, in words, habits, names, and ideas. A Roman joke scratched into a wall, a recipe for sauce, a legal opinion about inheritance, a military letter asking for socks, a poem urging us to seize the day, a funeral inscription telling a passerby that someone was loved. These are the small bridges between their world and ours. They do not ask us to admire blindly. They ask us to remember that history is made not by abstractions, but by people whose days felt as real to them as this evening feels to us. So as the story of Rome settles, it may help to picture not the empire at its widest, not a map colored in imperial red, but the Tiber in the dark. The river moves past old stones, past bridges, past reflections of lamps. It has seen kings, consuls, dictators, emperors, bishops, pilgrims, soldiers, tourists, and ordinary people walking home at the end of a day. The river does not explain the story. It carries it. Like all old rivers, it remembers without speaking. The traditional date given for the fall of the Western Roman Empire is 476 CE, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, the name combining the first and last of Rome's rulers in a coincidence that history sometimes provides. But this date is, in a sense, misleading. The Roman world did not simply stop on that day. The cities continued. The roads continued. The Latin language continued. The legal traditions continued. The Catholic Church, using Latin and organizing itself along Roman administrative lines, preserved much of what had made Rome Rome. The peoples who had entered the empire and disrupted its political order gradually absorbed its culture and came to see themselves as its heirs. The medieval kingdoms of Europe were built on Roman foundations, sometimes consciously, as when Charlemagne was crowned Roman emperor by the Pope in 800 CE, sometimes unconsciously, in the thousands of Roman habits of mind and practice that persisted long after the political structure had dissolved. What the Romans gave the world is not a simple list. It is more like a presence, a pervasive quality in the way things are arranged in the modern world that reflects, more than most people realize, a civilization that organized human life along Roman lines for centuries. The week as we know it, the 7-day week, was popularized through the Roman world. The calendar we use, with its months named for Roman gods and its structure established by Julius Caesar and refined by Augustus, is the Roman calendar. The languages hundreds of millions of people speak. The legal concepts that underlie modern law. The engineering principles behind bridges and vaults and concrete construction. The idea of a city with a public forum, a place where citizens gather. The idea of a standing army with professional soldiers. The idea of citizenship extending across an empire to people of different origins and cultures. These are Roman inventions or Roman adaptations and extensions of earlier ideas that became so fundamental to the way Western civilization organizes itself that they have become invisible as the Roman roads still running beneath the asphalt of European highways. The ruins of Rome that survive in the modern city are experienced by millions of visitors every year, and there is something remarkable about that experience. You can stand in the Forum Romanum and look at the Arch of Septimius Severus, built in 203 CE to celebrate victories in the East, and then look across at the medieval churches built into the walls of ancient temples, and then look beyond to the dome of a Renaissance palace, and the whole of Western history seems to compress itself into a single view. Rome never entirely went away. It became the substrate on which everything that came after was built. It haunted the imagination of the medieval world, which called itself the Holy Roman Empire and dreamed of Rome's unity and order. It inspired the Renaissance, which found in Rome's literature and art and philosophy the vocabulary for a new cultural awakening. It influenced the architects of the American Republic, who built their capital in the Roman style and named their upper legislative chamber the Senate. The language that the Romans spoke continues to live in a different way in the institutions of scholarship and science. Latin was the language of European scholarship throughout the medieval and early modern periods. The language in which universities conducted their business, in which scientists published their findings, in which philosophers debated their questions. Even today, the scientific names of plants and animals are Latin. Medical and legal terminology is overwhelmingly Latin in origin. The Catholic Church still uses Latin in its formal documents. When you use a word like senator or citizen or republic or forum or campus or library or candidate or capital, you are using a Latin word that has been in continuous use for more than 2,000 years. There is a particular quality to the study of Rome that sets it apart from many other historical subjects. Rome is not alien. It is, in a fundamental sense, familiar, because we have inherited so much of it. Because the civilization we live in was built substantially on Roman foundations. Because the ideas and institutions and habits of mind that Rome developed have been transmitted to us through 2,000 years of continuous use. When you read what a Roman wrote about his daily concerns, his children's education, his property disputes, his worries about money, his complicated relationships with his neighbors and colleagues, you recognize the territory. The concerns are not the same as ours, but they are not completely different either. And in that recognition is something valuable, a reminder that the human experience, across all its extraordinary variety of time and place and culture, has a continuity that transcends any single civilization. The Roman poet Horace wrote, in the 1st century BCE, a phrase that has become one of the most famous in Latin literature. Carpe diem, seize the day. He did not mean it as an invitation to recklessness. He was writing about the importance of finding pleasure and meaning in the present moment, because the future is uncertain and time passes. It is a thought that a person lying in bed tonight, in the 21st century, can understand without any translation of spirit, only of language. Horace is gone. Rome is gone. But the thought survives, and it still makes sense, and it still carries something true. Rome built for eternity, and in many ways it found it. Not in the form its builders imagined, but in a different, more surprising form. The physical empire dissolved, but the civilization it created became the seed from which so much else grew. The roads, the laws, the languages, the literature, the architecture, the engineering, the ideas about governance and citizenship and public life. All of these traveled forward through time, sometimes diminished, sometimes transformed, sometimes preserved with extraordinary fidelity, but always present. Rome is not a dead civilization. It is one of the most living things in the modern world, present in ways that most people never stop to notice, but that are everywhere, as pervasive and as invisible as the air. There is something in the sweep of Rome's story, from those huts on a muddy hill to the marble city of 1 million people, from a small collection of Latin-speaking farmers to the lords of a world that stretched from Scotland to Mesopotamia. That speaks to something deep in human nature. The desire to build, the desire to connect, the desire to make things that last, the desire to leave some mark on the world that says, we were here, and we made something. Not everything Rome built lasted. Not every road survived. Not every building stood. Not every law endured. But enough did. Enough survived to allow us to sit here, tonight, and trace the lines of connection from then to now, from that muddy hill by a river to the civilization in which we find ourselves living. The forum where Cicero spoke is covered now in a thin layer of spring weeds in the cracks between the stones. The temples are roofless. The Palatine Hill where emperors built their palaces has returned to pine trees and wild roses. The Tiber still runs, as it always has, brown and steady toward the sea. And the stones of the ancient city are still there, beneath the streets and under the foundations of buildings built on top of buildings, layer upon layer, century upon century, all the way down to those first post holes in the Iron Age earth of the Palatine where the story of Rome began. It is enough to hold in the mind as you rest tonight. The long story, the enormous ambition, the ordinary lives that made it possible, the bread and the wine and the olive oil, the scribe with his stylus, the mason with his trowel, the road that ran, straight as intention, from city to city across a continent, the mother watching her children play in the courtyard of a house that no longer stands, the old man sitting in the evening shade of a portico, watching the day and over a city that would outlast him by centuries. They are all gone now, and Rome with them, and yet somehow not gone at all. And so we come gently to the end of tonight's journey. We have followed Rome from its beginning on a hill above a river to its reach across the ancient world. We have walked its streets and eaten its bread and sat in the shade of its arches. We have heard its laws and spoken its language, or rather, spoken the language it gave us. We have looked at the face of its emperors and heard the voices of its ordinary people scratched into plaster walls. Rome endured because it was more than an empire. It was an idea about how people might live together, imperfectly, contradictorily, sometimes beautifully, always humanly. That idea has never entirely ended. Let your mind settle now. Let the weight of 2,000 years of history rest softly. The roads are quiet. The Forum is empty under the stars. The Tiber moves slowly through the dark city. Everything that needs to be said has been said. Everything that needed to be built was built. And it is all still there, in the foundations of the world around you. Sleep well. Good night.